Hello.
Hey.
Welcome, everybody, to Office Hours, episode number 10 with our special guest, David Cohen, and my host, Sandy McCarran.
Hey. Hey,
Yo.
so David, let's get into it. Let's get a 2-minute rundown of your background and uh, what led you to focus on AI strategy and transformation.
For sure. And can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. So to give you both of you know me, but I'll give the audience my background as well. I come from a very traditional consulting background, sort of big four. I'm a data strategist by trade and have been in like large scale transformation for a long time, decade plus of doing Fortune 500 scale, data transformation work. And obviously have expanded into the AI strategy space over recent years, helping large organizations understand how to effectively use AI and how to really get value from it, and also expanding into smaller organizations as well to help them do some of that with less of the, you know, um, less of the bureaucracy, let's call it, of large scale operations.
Yeah. Okay. So that's actually a good follow-up question there. Was there a specific moment or project where you realized that this was an opportunity for you, that organizations needed this type of effort or a different
Yeah, I
approach?
think I mean the feeling has been there for a long time, right? That like as AI becomes more prevalent everywhere, that there's sort of a degree of FOMO across everybody that
Hmm.
we work with.
Mm-hmm.
In my own consultancy, as you both know, I particularly focus and work with other consultancies and doing some of the work that I do, and white labeling my ideation and strategy work for other more technically oriented consultancies. But what I've noticed is that there's a certain degree of chaos on our end as implementers to understand how to and what to roll out for particular organizations that we work with. So the realization for me came that I could take my skill sets in kind of defining structure and defining a set of strategies, really, to bring order to the process of defining what's going to happen in that world where like AI can be anything.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Mary Beth, I'll let you jump in if you want to ask some questions.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I just didn't do at the top with housekeeping, folks, please, just so you know, Christine is taking LinkedIn Live questions and Richard is taking questions on our Substack Live, and they will pass them to us. So if you have questions as they come up through our session with David, please send them over and we'll take questions and answer them as they come in. So really, David, next I just wanted to kind of dig in with a minute for you is like when you deal with leadership teams, and I know we've talked about this, they say we need an AI strategy, but like what do they really mean about it, and what should they, think about what they should do and the meaning of that? How should they go about that?
Yeah, I think that question is two separate parts. The like, what do they mean when they say we need an AI strategy? Typically is somebody that I report to or that like has a vested interest in the success of my work told me that I needed to do and use AI effectively. Largely, in many cases these days, people don't actually know what that means, right? Like because it's a very greenfield space. In some cases, they work in regulated industries. They don't know what it means from a legal or substantial perspective to roll these out. Um, so what they usually mean is I need help, right?
Yeah.
Because they're like trying to make these tools real, or to build custom tools that enable them to actually solve problems within their context, but don't know how. So what they should actually mean is what problems are we going to solve through this? At the end of the day, the efficiency and problem solving, just like any other tool that we've always had, is what we try to solve through these things. So we don't just use AI for its own sake, any of us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what any of these leaders should mean is effectively the same thing as like what problems from a business perspective are we going to solve through AI tools, whether pre-canned or otherwise.
Yeah. Mary
So
Beth and
I
I've
love
been
I
saying this
love how
for
you
a
go
bit. Yeah.
onto that point, David, is what I think we've always talked to you about is we got to go being product people, data people, go back to the problem and not
Yep.
the shiny tool. and really what are we trying to achieve? So how do you get someone to make that shift?
Well, I think some degree of that is self-interest, right? I think people think about their problems on a day-to-day basis and the things that they struggle with, especially on a at a leadership level. I think every, leadership team member anywhere is thinking about incentives and things that
Mhm.
will make them successful. So in that case, the AI conversation is no different, right? It's like centering it around things that will mean something for those people in their respective roles, and that will make their life easier from a
Yeah,
work perspective.
I like how
Sorry.
you put it in the overall, but then how it will make people's lives easier because that gets buy-in. Is I feel like that's where you're leading a little bit.
Yeah, I think I mean I was saving that point for one of the later questions that I know we're getting to, but
Sorry.
the problem with AI adoption largely is that there is significantly less buy-in than we would assume as implementers of technology, right? Like there's a degree of friction that we face, even more so than the traditional change management aspect that our work has always had. I think is 10 or 20 times, if not more, worse than it's always been because there's a degree of fear that we're swimming against from an undercurrent perspective.
Yeah. I can't wait till we get through the I'm losing my job to the I'm 10xing my job phase. That's going to be great.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I
So,
think you kind of touched a little bit on where I was thinking to go, where is the biggest place, where is the place that people are really getting stuck? Is it the tech, the people, the governance? I feel
No,
like
I
you're
think
going to the people, or where do you think the biggest
well,
place
I
are going?
think that there's several parts. So if you think of any implementation project or any sort of initiative to change, there's three parts to it. There's the people side, there's the process side, and the technology side.
Yeah.
On for each of those, right, on the technology side to start with, there's always an indecision of like, what is the right tool for us? Does it exist? Do we need to build it? Can we just buy an existing one? And how much investment is it going to take? That's a hard conversation, but frankly, it's the easiest conversation of the three projects
yeah.
because it's essentially just picking a direction, solving a specific problem, and then going with it and actually enabling it. From a process perspective, there is some degree of follow-up that happens, right? Like some degree of organization and structure that needs to occur for that
Mhm.
technology to be implemented properly, for it to be governed across a certain series of processes that maintain it and keep it clean. As we all know from a data perspective, we always know the old garbage in, garbage out principle that still remains in the AI world.
Mhm.
And then from a people perspective, which is the hardest and most important part, is enabling and not forcing, but what's the word? Supporting people in navigating what it means to have a changed way of doing work on a day-to-day basis is critical, right? Like there's no getting around it that if we don't work with people rather than, I guess, on top of them to deploy these tools in one way or another, they will just reject them, and it'll be natural for them to.
Right. Yeah.
And in
Um,
your work, you bring them into that, correct, as part of the process?
Yeah, so a lot of my work is in helping gamify the process of navigating what it means to define those real problems that that they're understanding, to tie the reality of their business processes to an actual initiative to make AI real, and most importantly, to help the consultancies and people like us that implement it define what a meaningful action plan looks like to go from A to B.
Yeah, I think, David, we're hoping that you could also show us some examples. I know I've done a very similar type of role as you, and always having something that the team can center around, and also feel like their voice is heard, have their buy-in, and that they feel a part of the change and not so out of control over it. So I would love for you to give us some examples if you possibly could.
Yeah, I always love a demo.
Always happy to. So let me pull up my screen. Let me know when you guys can see my screen.
Wait, I'm adding the screen. 1 second.
Sure.
Yeah, perfect.
Here
All
we
right.
have,
So
perfect.
So what you guys are seeing here on the screen is as they were saying, the demo of what my work looks like. So typically when I say gamifying the process of talking about AI strategy, is through workshops like the ones that you see here on the screen. So what you're seeing is a series of Miro boards. For those of you that don't know, Miro is a platform by which we can essentially do the equivalent of a whiteboard, but online. So what I do is I create these collaborative sessions by which we can essentially, as I said, gamify. And by gamify, I mean like structure the process of talking about AI strategy and the data that sits underneath it into contained or sort of structured activities that bring people together into a setting that they can then define what AI is going to do for them, whether they are ready for it, whether their data is ready for it, and what they need to do to get there. So it looks sort of like this, where there's a series of pre-structured, let's talk about your pain points, let's talk about opportunities, let's define what the future looks like for us, and most importantly, let's prioritize them into a set of ideas like this that can then turn into a plan from an active perspective to define, we are going to achieve these outcomes, short term, medium term, and long term. And then from a perspective of defining what's next, we're going to have an actionable set of next goals to move forward with. But obviously, as I said, it's not just ideation that I do this through. There's another few varieties of my work that I do that I can walk through more detail, but I'll let you guys ask more questions because I'm sure you have some.
Yeah. I think we're seeing a lot of companies are running pilots that just can't scale. And I think a lot of it goes back to they don't have well-defined use cases. And a lot of the thread of this conversation is going back to the original SDLC, starting with the problem, not the solution. So just wanted to see what kind of separates those pilots that really become real from the ones that are just staying in experiment POC mode.
So what happens a lot in these sessions is that, as you can imagine, not every organization is in the same place as far as deploying or readiness to deploy AI. That's why you see many different varieties of these workshops that I build here, for example, is that if an organization is ready and able, it may just be ideation or definition of use cases that they need. But if they're at a stage where their data is not ready for that to happen in the first place, maybe we need to start talking about their data competency and literacy first before we can talk about AI readiness or even ideation. Or maybe they have a set of priorities that they've already defined and they just need an idea on how to go past that, or like which one needs to go first, essentially. So as you can tell, the problem is that different organizations have different levels of maturity in navigating that process. And the ones that are most successful are the ones that are able to sort of internalize or define what stage of the process they are in, and most importantly, where their biggest weakness is, so that somebody like us can help them navigate that.
So, David, one thing there is how do you pinpoint where they are in their journey on this, right? And what needs to be done, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for example, when I do conversations like this, one of the exercises, and this is from a data perspective, but you can think about it from an AI perspective as well. What I like to do in these conversations is to have a pretty open discussion about where an organization sits from a readiness perspective. So if you think about it here, instead of data, you might say AI lifecycle, right? It might be readiness, it might be ideas, it might be even buy-in from their team. So what we would do as part of these conversations is to structure a series of honest discussions with the decision makers in every part of the organization, which would be brought together into a room to say, are we ready for that? And if not, what is the reason? Is it a people reason? Is it a technology reason? Or is it a process reason? And from that perspective, using these activities that you see here to break that down into the big picture, the barriers that they face, and what the reason for those barriers are in the first place. What I find often is that in a setting where we bring a lot of leaders in any organization together, there's a lot of unspoken things that happen on the day-to-day of running an organization from a technical perspective. And even when it gets to rolling out AI, for example, there's so many things that they haven't talked about that come across when they get in the same room and start discussing those things.
Right. So,
And then I guess this is kind of fascinating to me. I'm sorry, Sandy.
yeah, no worries. Okay.
How do you bring everyone into that same room, and who do you have in the room? And then is it just senior people? Is it people in the middle, people in the, across the organization? How does that all work?
Yeah, so typically what we like to index for is having decision makers in the room. It's not that, the rank and file of any organization don't have valuable things to say. However, from an AI perspective, ideation and deployment is most effective when when it comes from the top, when it's, top led or led by leadership. The reason for that is that from a design and deployment perspective, you want leaders to have a voice, or to basically tie into the business processes and not mandate, but champion the deployment of these tools from a adoption standpoint on a day-to-day basis, so that it's tied to what these teams actually do. A CFO is not going to have the same use case for an AI tool as a COO, as a CEO, or a CIO would. And each of those people in an organization have different directives. They have different incentives to deploy these tools, and then most importantly, they have different incentives to achieve certain things for the organization. So what we want to do is to understand, if we get them all in the same room, what are the incentives and what are the objectives that sit across all of them? And most important, what are the most high priority items from a strategic perspective for the entire team? That conversation usually never happens until we force it to happen as consultants. And more likely than not, there are significant push and pull sort of dynamics between each of those people individually that never come across to the leaders of the organization unless you get them in the same place.
I just wanted to follow up really quickly for the leaders who are listening. What are the early indicators that the pilot's going to succeed? Right. So we hear a lot about them not working. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the number one factor whether a pilot will succeed or not is whether it's tied to a real business outcome and whether it's measured in terms of business outcome. So we hear a lot in like AI deployment about tying to business outcomes and all this and all that. Mm-hmm. But to me, the real differentiator is tying that outcome to both a real metric and a real term in terms of time. So if we're talking about a short-term outcome, a medium-term outcome, or a long-term outcome, it has to both be measurable and tied to the specific both activities and incentives of a person, right, which is an employee. So the part of in the workshops I was showing you guys earlier, part of the driver of the conversations that I do is not only setting a time frame to the objectives that are being met from an AI deployment perspective, but also to tie it to specific people so that there's ownership in the deployment of those things. A large part of what the reason why some of these initiatives fail is that there's no driver once somebody like us leaves. There's a consultant that gets hired to roll out some initiative and then we leave and that just falls apart. So a large part of the success of an initiative is whether there's clear ownership, metrics, and tracking or sort of governance around the program.
Yes. Can I throw you a question from the chat? It looks like Mary Beth Quinn threw one in there. Many leaders feel pressure to do something with AI quickly. How do you help organizations identify where AI can actually create value instead of chasing trends?
That's a great question. So when in the activities that I showed you earlier, one of the drivers or conversation starters that I like to use is tying the specific, like talking about business process rather than talking about trends. So when we talked about defining pain points and such, the reality is, or the question is never like what would you like to do with AI? It's actually where does your job suck, or like where do you not like your job, right? Such that we can say if we were to make that job better, if we wanted to improve it, what could automation or what could AI do for you? And in many ways, I actually like to not use the word AI at all when I'm discussing these things. So I just use the word automation. I use the word efficiency. There's a host of other synonyms and kind of related words that can get people out of the mindset of thinking about, your average LLM or chatbot tool, which is not just what we're talking about. I think all of us here know that the capabilities of automation tools have existed well before LLMs were popular. And will exist well after that as well. So when we're talking about AI tools, we're not just simply talking about your ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. We're actually talking about a host of custom built automation tools that can be useful for many things. So it helps me a lot to remove the word AI from the conversation in some degree. Like that's just semantics, but it helps a lot to focus people on the right things.
Yeah, I think it matters though, because people have feelings about AI. There, we've been
Yeah.
Covering this in
Well-
other chats as well.
well,
Go ahead. Go
I
ahead, Mary
think
Beth.
what that does though is it brings it back to the business is what you're doing by not talking about AI. So you're taking the focus off the shiny tool. And I always think about there's the business strategy and there's probably like 4 buckets or so of goals. Increase revenues, operational efficiency, mitigate risk, and improve the customer experience. Be internal or external. And what you're doing is you're bringing it back to those. And then it's not saying we're going to use AI to get there, but what are the goals? And then, it could be automation, it could be whatever it may be. They'll get you there. I don't know. Am I thinking about that correctly, David? Or that's kind of
Yeah, I think those 4 pillars are very critical, and you hit them like right on. Is that most organizations are swirling in like a world or like a tornado of ideas.
Yeah,
And at the end of the day, they have to be in one way or another tied to one of those 4. And if they're not doing those 4 effectively, then that idea is not worth pursuing. So the problem is, navigating that swirl is difficult without guidance, and that's why we exist. Is that like, understanding what business impact an idea has for your organization is everything. It's step number 1 and also step number 10 at the same time.
I like how you put that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have another question I just wanted to throw out there. How should organizations be thinking about like a buy versus build, right? Especially for any internal capability. Are they partnering or, that seems to be an area where it's like shifting. There's like some decisions, some guys like one, Claude, some like ChatGPT. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. I mean, in that there's the question itself is both like a budget, time, and ability perspective, but also there's a million degrees of complication, as you both well know, of like whether you should buy or build something, largely being tied to whether you're in a regulated industry or one that requires a certain degree of safety planning that some others don't. For example, if you're in the tech space, you probably can try just buying something or like you can just build something very easily or buy it, either one, without much consideration for any other factor, really. What we're seeing now is that there's other industries in which there's significantly more interest and care for how these tools get deployed, like healthcare, like financial services, like, government, public service. There's a lot of both interest and care into making sure that these tools are deployed responsibly, so that from a security and safety perspective, but also from a governance standpoint and from a like public interest and ethical perspective, that these tools are deployed in a way that doesn't harm people's lives.
Yeah.
That
And
makes a lot of
following up for that is what kind of roles or skills do you think that every organization may need in-house, regardless of whether it's a buy or build decision?
I think that the main one, and it's not a new skill, right? I think you need analytics and technology people that are able to understand the like language of business, of like what the business actually runs, that are able to speak and understand from a strategic perspective how an organization really behaves. And I think any person that's been in a technology strategy role will tell you that has always been scarce way before the days of AI.
Yep.
And it will continue to be scarce. There's a reason why people like us continue to have jobs, right? Is that like there's a scarcity of people that can marry both the technology knowledge with the human knowledge of understanding a strategic business outcome. And at the end of the day, those are the people that will drive the implementation and adoption of AI tools moving forward.
Right.
Agreed.
As
Agreed.
Longtime PMO, I support that message. So I don't know, Mary Beth, if you wanted to grab some of the
There
questions
is
from
a
the-
question in the chat about Data and AI implementation, which I think also would dovetail with responsible AI as you're talking about too, but it's also what builds the trust to get the adoption of these tools. So what are your thoughts there?
So what was the question?
Data and AI implementation, how do we address the data within the AI implementation and making sure that's carried out properly?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a little biased on this question, given that I come from a data background. But I think that, like, foundationally for any AI project, it's always a data project first. Any organization that pretends or wants to be ready for an AI project should or has to be doing an AI or a data audit first and understand their data literacy in order to roll out anything from a like actionable perspective. The easiest way to drive mistrust and hatred really of AI tools or any tools is to roll out a tool that provides wrong information to a user. There is no easier way to lose adoption or to lose buy-in. So the number one perspective is not like, what should we be using these tools for? Is, are we ready to roll out these tools? And is our data clean enough? Are our processes governed enough? Is our infrastructure able to handle the scalability or the scale needed to provide data to everybody in our organization even? And are people able to use it effectively? One of the dynamics that we've experienced and seen a lot in recent months and years is that giving everybody access to information does not always mean information is absorbed more. In the same way that when we rolled out more dashboards in a previous iteration of this hype cycle, that we saw that giving people more dashboards didn't mean that people use data more effectively.
Oh, that's a really good way to think about that.
Yeah.
Now that you put that seed in my head. No, there are some more questions in here. Looking ahead, what do you think will separate organizations that win AI over the next 2 years than those that fall behind? That's a good one.
I think my take on it is the organizations that will see the most value out of implementing AI will be the ones that focus on the boring stuff, to be honest with you. I think everybody's like super excited about like transformational business change. I think the more boring you go with this, the better. Like if 3 people care about your use case and you can actually deploy it to those 3 people and change their life in a meaningful way from a work perspective, that is more valuable than mediocre results across 10,000 people, as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, yes, everyone has the
Boring is
read
good.
AI, or everyone has their meeting minutes are solid. That's a perfect example, right? Yeah.
And I can give you a million concrete examples of this, right? But we're seeing now that the more niche the use case and the more focused, I guess is the better way of saying it, the more focused the use case, the better the results, because it solves a real problem for a real person. And that is just a reality of where we're at now, is that all of us realize that the time from like pain point identification to solution has been significantly decreased, but that hasn't changed anything about the process of identifying a problem and actually solving it. What we've changed is our toolkit to be able to solve that problem to begin with.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love that. That is spot on. There is another question here.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you see organizations make when you're trying to scale AI initiatives?
I think the biggest mistake, and I alluded to this earlier, is not assigning the right leadership or like buy-in from a top level perspective into an organization rolling it out. What you see a lot of teams doing is assigning like AI committees to figure out like what they're going to do with AI and how they're going to roll this out. And what happens is that, as we all know, decision by committee means like not making decisions effectively. I think more often than not, especially these days, AI advancement, and especially in most organizations, comes from the bottom up rather than the top down, like people trying things out, breaking systems, and then fixing those broken systems. So I think the best driver or the biggest mistake is not assigning a leader to those, initiatives, not assigning a person who is responsible for driving buy-in and for driving sort of directive in terms of how to, get the rank and file of any team to do so.
Can I follow up on that one? Where are you
Please.
seeing that leader, right? So if you say it's a product owner, my head went directly to, it's the product team. There you have the final decider, because I've done a lot of just product builds. Are you seeing that that's the same use case or the same situation with AI?
No, it actually varies quite a bit. I've seen a host of different types of ownership of initiatives within organizations. Sometimes you see the technology side of the house handled because it's a technology at the end of the day, so it gets passed on to CTO, CIO, and their teams. Sometimes the chief data officer in some degree. But in some more forward-thinking organizations, it's actually assigned to people that drive business outcomes, like the COO or the CEO, even.
Yeah.
Perhaps the chief strategy officer, or as you said, the product leadership in product-oriented teams. In that, organizations that succeed tend to just take it like AI enablement as a matter of fact. Like they're not actively thinking about enabling AI. They're just doing their normal work and then, finding AI useful to make that easier or make that better.
Right, right. Look,
Yeah.
while we're still on the people side for 1 second, when you are finding people who resist, what's your strategy? Maybe they didn't sign up for this transformation, but here we are. So what's your advice there for leaders?
Yeah, I think I also alluded to this earlier, but self-interest is a very powerful tool. So, we know, all of us here know that from a change perspective, the biggest motivators are self-interest and fear. And from a fear perspective, there's nothing we can do but show people that this is, like, when used responsibly, this is a very powerful transformational tool for all of us.
Mhm.
But from a self-interest perspective, I think there's a lot of room and a lot of greenfield space that we can do to bring people onto the fold and show them that this is valuable to them. Like, as I said, the whole point of tying a pain point that somebody has to something that can be like a improved version of that process is not that like solving that process and making it better is cool, is that showing to them that their life specifically can be made better through that new process is what will get them to implement that process. Not because the process is cool in and of itself, is because they're self-interested in making their own lives easier, being better at their jobs, getting paid more, or whatever. There's certain there's a layer, or it's like an onion, right? There's like layers to it, and we have a lot of unrealized potential as far as that goes, because I think we are hyper focused on like the cool factor of the tool, less so than like the realities of how people work.
Cool.
So, I like how all this discussion is going, and I have a question, like a kind of tangential, but coming back to something is, you talked about the different areas that you've seen people backing these AI initiatives, and just in conversations with people, you said sometimes it's the CTO, the CDO, it could be a business leader. Does one tend to work better than another? Because there's debates about that. I'm just curious to see what your opinion is.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't think I have the right answer to this. And in fact, I don't think there is a right answer. Like, I don't think it's the one size fits all for every organization that, like, I'm going to say your CTO should be the one handling your AI transformation. I think every team is different, and it very much depends on the both quality and buy-in culturally of the leader and the team. Like, the best way I could put this is that what I see is that the best leader in an organization suited to deploy AI is the one that has the most cultural buy-in within that organization. That could be your COO, that could be your CTO, that could be a director level person, that could be a VP. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that person has the personal level chops to get everybody to buy into this, rather than mandate or dictate a certain set of rules because of their title. So I don't think it's necessarily
The
a set
influence.
person. Influence is the right word. That's the word I was looking for.
Being able to have like the influence, that I really like that, because it's so important, because you're going to have to influence people that you don't necessarily have working for you or your purview. You have an initiative, you need to get them enrolled into your mission, where you see things going. I think that's a really great way to put it.
Yeah. And we might not even know what the role is yet. It might not exist. Maybe we have to invent it and create that type of role as well.
Yeah,
So,
what
exciting.
you see a lot of is organizations kind of retrofitting a chief AI officer role into their existing kind of structure, and then they sort of exist in this weird in between space of like not knowing what organization they report to, like what incentives they are like answering to. And so that's when AI deployment gets clunky, is when that AI officer, so to speak, doesn't have the autonomy to drive buy-in, and when they don't have the cultural capital or the influence within an organization to drive change.
Yeah, we did this when I was on the innovation team, right? And we had to rename our team, and we were told not to use innovation in the title because then people think you own it, and the rest of the organization does not feel entitled to it. So, just a tip there, that having a whole separate AI organization may not be what you think. So, Mary
Correct.
Beth, do you have questions as well?
So yeah, just I guess a question on the governance and responsible AI keeps coming up, and I think it's very tied with your work. So how do you keep the momentum going on a project, but you don't kill it where, hey, look, we got to put guardrails on this, do it the right way. How do you keep that ship moving, or the train going?
So I think a lot of this is, as an organization, drawing guidelines and kind of drawing barriers to allow people to experiment freely. I think that when you give people too much structure for experimentation, that kind of defeats the purpose of experimentation. And where we're at, what we want is for people to experiment with making their day-to-day better through AI-powered tools. That requires giving them some grace when things break, because what happens when you experiment with new things is that things go wrong. There is a way to do that responsibly. There is a way to do that without like falling into lawsuit land. What happens is that you need to plan for that, and you need to give people latitude to get there, and most patience when things take time, when things don't work. And as we all know, your average large scale enterprise is not good at patience or any of the things that I mentioned. So like it's a matter of having a leader or a set of leaders that are able to give people that latitude to experiment and just fail a lot.
So it sounds like a rather like lightweight governance model in there to give them that experimentation, and then there's like the overview there.
Yeah, I think it's a very, I mean, to use a like overused term, it's a very agile process, right? In the sense of like taking what doesn't work from like repeated cycles of iteration, and then making sure that you're learning from them on an ongoing basis. And as you said, from a governance perspective, it's making sure that the process of governance accounts for the fact that people will not only fail, but that there will be problems along the way that are solvable problems, but problems nonetheless.
Yeah, cool. So, David, I will ask, if you were advising a CEO who has a budget for AI this year, but they don't have their roadmap, or maybe they thought they did, but it's not moving, what would you advise them to do in the next 90 days?
Yeah, I think the number one thing would be, as I said earlier, is to define who's going to be the correct cultural champion in your organization, and really empower that person to drive organic adoption in your business. What I mean by organic adoption is that in an ideal world, you don't want to top-down mandate people to use AI tools, or to even give you ideas for using those things. What you actually want is for people to organically, like bottom up, give you ideas for navigating those things, and then get funneled through that leadership. The role of that leader that drives or that influences adoption and that drives engagement is not to mandate the use of tools, is to funnel all of the great ideas that come from the bottom up into a set of tactically, strategically relevant ideas that can then be prioritized. So going back to the sessions that I was showing earlier, the whole point of having leadership and decision makers only at those sessions is not to exclude, ideas from rank and file people who are often much more involved in actually experimenting and doing some of the testing that we were talking about earlier, but rather bringing decision makers into a room that can actually make a meaningful decision for an organization. So step number one for any leader, any CEO that wants to implement AI is like define who your influencers are. It doesn't have to be people directly underneath you, right? It can be anybody, and then empower them to create a program where people can fail a lot and then get better at, showing like kind of funneling ideas up the chain, so to speak, and take it from there. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that.
Right. Yeah, again, very similar to our innovation strategy. But when Mary Beth and I were at our old company, where you'd have a champions network, maybe some hack days, things to expose them and let them ask questions of the champions. And swag always helps, of course. So.
Yeah, well, and a lot of it is a realization that I think in this space in particular, moving fast is better than not moving at all.
Yeah.
And things can always be fixed, but there's some degree of you just have to try, right? Like you just got to jump in the pool and see how deep it goes, I guess.
Yeah. Rip the Band-Aid off.
Correct.
Mary Beth, do we want to get into our lightning round, or are we little?
Yeah,
we have other
let's
questions?
do that.
Okay.
So David, our lightning round that we do with everyone, I think the first question is, what recommendations or what are you reading now in podcasts or newsletters to stay current on AI and the trends that are happening?
Yeah, I think on the influencers and who to follow, there's a host of people especially on LinkedIn, where I spend most of my time, that kind of share insights on the process of both deploying but also thinking about AI and data work from a strategic perspective. I'm happy to share some links to folks that I follow in the comments or in the post show items. But there's a host of people that are sharing from a real world perspective what it means to deploy AI or data work from a consultant's perspective, and they're really fascinating. So would recommend following many of those people, both on LinkedIn and elsewhere.
Cool.
I agree. There's a host of people. And then, is there a particular tool that you personally like for AI that has changed how you do work?
So there's two answers to that. Obviously, like everybody else, I think Claude has become the sort of second brain for my company, is the best way I could describe that. And truly significantly expanding my capability to do basically every internal process to my own company. There's a host of other more niche tools, is the best way I could describe it, that I use for specific processes and things in my company. So do anything from marketing to operations to sales to even delivering my day-to-day work. It's incredible the amount of transformation we've seen in just a couple of years. And I in retrospect, I can't imagine what my company would look like today if I didn't have those tools available to me.
Yeah,
I agree.
Claude, shout out Claude for finally having some user experience.
Yeah,
and all the integrations. It's amazing.
If Anthropic wants to sponsor the show, I'm sure they everybody here would love that.
Oh, yeah.
We love that.
Yeah. Is there one resource in particular, if someone was getting started with an AI strategy, what would you recommend?
So again, going back to the point about failing a lot and trying things out, the biggest, easiest resource, not really a resource, the biggest piece of advice I can give you is just try things. Try building something, try creating something, and fail at it so that you can understand what exactly you have in your hands. A large part of the problem is people don't know what they have the capability of building because they don't understand the capability of the tool. So you just need to try something out and see what happens, and then go from there. It's a natural born curiosity pattern that we've seen over and over and over in previous technology waves, this one is no different. Treat it the same way that you would the first time that you walked onto the internet.
Yeah. And turn it off when it stops being useful to you, right?
That's
It
a
doesn't
good
have to
point as
fail. It could
well.
just be, it's played out. Or you have two tools that do the same thing. Don't pay for it for a year. Pay for it for a month and play with it, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I agree. Great, wholeheartedly. And David, I mean, thank you for so much. I mean, for taking the time to be with us today. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you and your perspective and your insight. Also, I believe you also have a newsletter that you're launching, and if you can tell everybody about that.
I do. So I today actually I just launched a newsletter, which I guess I sent you guys the link, so you'll publish it in the chat, correct? But the point of the newsletter is to share more of the insights that I share on my LinkedIn page, which everybody should also follow, but in significant more detail. So if you're running a consultancy out there in either the world of data or the world of AI, I'll be sharing a lot of insights on what it means to both implement the tools and systems that we're talking about, but also what it means to grow and build a consultancy that does those things. Because that's primarily my space, is I service and work with other consultancies and either helping them deploy these systems and sell to their own clients, or to help them grow and scale internally from a process perspective. So my newsletter will have a lot of fun information, both like in terms of clients I've served, fun tidbits and workflows and processes for navigating that, and many other pieces of content relative to all the great things I share with my account. So more to come soon, but please do subscribe in the link and that will be shared in the comments if it's not already.
Yes, Christine is dropping those in the comments if they're not shared already. Also, when we email attendees from our LinkedIn Live, we will include that information as well, and an article to follow up. So it has been a pleasure. And then I think we always talk about the next episode. Also, before we do that, one thing that we will be dropping ourselves later today, putting up a landing page. We've been talking about it a while, basically a workshop for executives, really a masterclass of what you need to know to bring AI to your organization. So we've just been finding a lot of people, as we talked about, they know they need to do something. How do we get a strategy? The use case is prioritization. What do you need to think about in terms of data, AI in technology-wise, as well as legal and regulatory. So that will be dropping today, and we're going to be doing our first initial cohort. So lastly, last announcement is our next LinkedIn Live will be with a good friend of the show. And gosh, we just did number 10, and this will be number 11 with Chris Thomas, who was the CTO of the accelerator at Moody's, as well as Slalom. He now is sitting on a number of companies, and his focus has been on AI agents and healthcare. So really we're talking about what's going on with the patient all the way to the back office and what is happening there. So better patient care, better handling of patient billing, insurance claims, all of that. So we are going to be talking to Chris in the next month, and we're going to be looking forward to having everyone join us. Again, I have to thank Sandy, my co-host, and David as well for joining us. And Sandy, anything to say to wrap us up?
One last shout out to Buva's Impact Global. Buva and Mary Beth will be on the next AI Salon New York, coming up in May 21st. So I'll be sending out details for that soon as well. So thank you so much, David. This was phenomenal. I'm good, Mary Beth, so we could sign off a little early.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.